Vous l'avez aimé mardi. Il revient
Loved
ce
him on
soir
Tuesday.
pour notre
He's
série
back
de la
here tonight.
semaine.
It's a weekly series. He's telling his story of experimental photography. Today, it is the second episode. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Marc Lenot.
Bonsoir, Marc.
Thank you. Good evening. For those of you who were already with us the evening before yesterday, I began to present a part of my research on experimental photography, what it is and how you can define it. So, a quick reminder of what we did on Tuesday evening. I'm just going to show you here. Tuesday, we talked a lot about photographs that you make without cameras. And just as a reminder of this, I would like to show you this photo of Hugo Mulas, which dates back to 72, just before he passed away. And it's a photogram of his hands, one negative, the other positive. What is experimental photography? It is an area that is quite neglected, that doesn't figure that much in the history of photography. And what I wanted to do was both to look for photographers who I thought did this type of work, and on the other hand, to try to define this, whereas there isn't really a definition. So I'm not going to bore you with a lot of theory, just I want to say a couple of words on how I came to think about this. This man is Willem Flusser. Willem Flusser is a Brazilian philosopher of Czech origin. He went to Brazil when the Nazis arrived in Prague, and he passed away in 1991. He was living in France at the time. This philosopher was interested in many things. He looked at communication, epistemology, and many other things, but he also worked on photography. And he defined, from a philosophical point of view, not practical, he defined photography by setting up a system. He used the word apparatus. It was a set of rules, of programs, defined by political, social, technical, economic reasons, which mean that these rules are imposed upon the photographers, and photographers make photographs within this program. And he says, in the conclusion of his small book, which is translated into France, he has very few books in French, but that is one, for philosophy of photography. As a conclusion, he says, but there are a few photographers who do not respect those rules, and those photographers we might call experimental photographers. He doesn't say much more about this, but I set off from this idea of not respecting the rules. And therefore this evening, I'm going to show you a certain number of photographers who do not respect the correct rules of photography, who play with those rules, who play with light, who play with time, who play with chemistry, play with the printing. Let's begin with light. The last picture I showed you on Tuesday evening was this one. It was a sort of a foretaste of today. It's a photograph by an Italian photographer who lives in Paris, Rosella Bellucci, and she makes extraordinary white photographs, entirely saturated with light. And we really have to spend some time in front of before the photograph, not necessarily before the screen, but before the print itself, so that the picture really we start to actually really see the picture. So she makes the photograph as white as possible. Other photographers make photographs as black as possible. I won't be able to show you here because we won't see anything this evening. Another rule for light, I think, I'm not a photographer, is never directly look at the sun, never directly photograph the sun. This is the work of an American, a cat from California called Chris McCall, and who photographed the sun. Photograph the sun? Yes, here he's in the north of the North Pole in Alaska. He has a rather complicated machine to take photographs. He changes the photographic plates every 2 or 3 hours, I don't know. And here you can see the curve of the sun that goes up and goes down during the polar day. And as you can see at the bottom here, this is not just a picture. The sun does not merely photographically imprint the paper, but sometimes it burns it. So sometimes the paper is actually burned. So here you have a photograph, and at once you have a testimony, a direct clue as to what the power of light can be for photography. The second parameter that you can play with is time. Since 1990, we have been taking instant photos. An instant photo is taken in a few fractions of a second in a decisive moment, and this is how we take the photograph generally. I'm going to show you a few photographers who do not respect this rule. Martin van Goosen, who's a Belgian photographer, uses a technique called photo finish, which is used actually to see who has won at the end of the race, or at the end of a horse race, for example. And within the photo itself, the film moves, the film unrolls, and therefore Van Velsen and others, Biometrical does this and others, unrolls his film within the camera and moves within a building. This is a building in Bruges. He moves throughout the building. It's not a camera, it's not a film in the cinematographic sense. It is a photo, but the part of the photo, the most at the left and at the right, were taken at 2 or 3 minute interval, whilst the film unrolls. And here, therefore, you have the negation of Muric's work to some extent, and to the contrary, the fact that on a single photo, which is 3 meters long, you have a time that is inscribed. Another example of a photographer who plays with time, this was before Donald Trump, but there were migrants that crossed the border illegally between Mexico and the States. And to denounce these migrants, there were people, vigilants, who hid cameras with an automatic trigger behind stones, behind trees at the border. And every time a migrant crossed the border, the camera was triggered and took a film of this migrant showing them running along the border. And then this photo was posted on the web to say, look, we're being invaded. And they're available, you can find them on internet. The equatorial artist who has lived in Paris for 15 years or so, Estefania Penafiel-Loizia, had got some of these videos. And when he projected them on the wall of his studio, he simply left the camera open for the 5, 10, 20 seconds that the migrants' race across the strip of land lasted. So what is fixed is fixed. You can see the rock, which hides the camera. You can see the trees that haven't moved in those 10 seconds. However, the running man, you can no longer see. He disappears in this picture. We're coming back to Degas photography, where the people who move disappear. We can maybe make out a shadow, something very fleeting. So, of course, this is not only a photographic work, but it's also a political work. The video was there to denounce the illegal migrants. Photography is there to hide them, to protect them, to provide them with shelter. So playing with time once again. This photographer who I find extraordinary, a German photographer, Michael Wesley, who lives in Berlin, he takes photos that last for the time of the event that he's photographing. If he photographs a football match, the photography lasts for 90 minutes plus the half time. So he opens his camera at the beginning and he closes it at the end of the football match. The result is that we can't see the players that are running too fast, but we just make out the audience. So he did this photograph lasted a little bit more than 2 years and 4 months. He opened the lens on the 5th of April 1997 and he closed it on the 3rd of June 1999. Throughout that entire time, the light made a print on the film. So of course they're rather special cameras, of course they're special films. But this is the scene. It's Potsdamer Platz. It's in Berlin. There were some buildings being being built, and we can see the way in which the buildings are built. We can see this fluidity of the buildings. And yet, look at the sky. Look at how the sun, for 2 years and 4 months, left its print on the film. And we think that it's like a solid line across the sky. And so he has a relationship with images and time that I find very impressive and extraordinary, because he is able to condense in a single picture an event that lasted for a long time. It's the contrary of films. He's the one you should be clapping for, not me. I'm just talking about it. The second part, when you play with the parameters, when you as photographers, you want to print a photo, you choose the paper of very good quality. The American photographer Alison Rossiter, who maybe you saw, for those who are loyal to Arles, in the Discovery Award of 4 or 5 years ago, she didn't win, but her work was presented. Alison Rossiter only works with outdated photographic paper. This one has been outdated expired since 1945. She worked with paper that was outdated in 1900. So these papers are kept in boxes that are not tight, and so there's light that seeps in, and maybe a photographer or an operator goes into a black box and try to develop it, and less fingerprints, and there are the chemical elements of the paper, of course, that have deteriorated in 40, 50 or 90 years. And so Alison Rossiter does not take photographs. This is not a landscape. She takes the paper and she develops it. That's all. Nothing more. So what we have here does not represent anything. I chose one which could have misled us, because we might think that it's a romantic lake. Not at all. It's just the fixer on the paper that did this. So this is typically somebody who, in her own way, uses the photographic object in a different way. Similarly, playing with the chemical parameters, maybe you're familiar with Pierre Cordier, who is a Belgian, French-Belgian, and he uses chemigrams. What are they? It is a sheet of sensitive paper on which Cordier does different alchemy. He might use washing up liquid, tomato juice. He puts different products. He found nail varnish, and he found different chemical recipes to make shapes appear on the paper. So here, once again, we don't have a picture of reality. We don't have a picture of the world. We don't see anything that has been photographed. It's called a dendalogram because it looks like a maze, but it's not a perfect picture either. You can see the irregularities. There's dust or due to the wind or something. And Cordier makes these pictures which have an extraordinary abstract beauty, which are photographs because there is photographic paper and light, but they're not documentary photos, they're not customary or even vernacular photos. Another example linked to physics, electricity rather than chemistry. And so, but of course, we're once again playing with the parameters here. Thank you. Denis Bernard, who is French, plays with electricity. So in the black room, he, with a plastic stick or something, he rubs it in his hands until he produces static electricity. And at the point where he feels that it will expose, where it will come out, he puts it on the paper. So what we see here, and so there are sparks, what we see here is a photo that is generated, self-generated, because the source of light is at the same time the object that is photographed. The plastic stick that creates the sparks and also is also the thing that's lighting the paper to provide this image, which is an image which is not just abstract, it shows sparks, but it's an image that is entirely created in that way. So what can we do at the top of the print. Generally, when you make a print, you try to do them in a sustainable manner. At the beginning of the 19th century, the whole question of photography is how can we keep an image, not just obtain it, but then conserve it. And today there are photographs who deliberately make pictures that do not last in time, that will disappear with time. This Colombian photographer who lives in Paris, Indira Tatiana Cruz, that takes photos. It's a photo in a run-down building where the wall is in very poor condition. And she printed this photo on rice paper and deliberately used a technique which means that this image will disappear little bit by little. It is disappearing. I can say I bought the photo and I can see it disappearing. I can see that little by little it's going black, and so this is typically an anti-photographic process or anti-conservation, anti-collection process. Final example of photographers who play with the sustainability of pictures. This is a British couple called Heather Ackroyd and Dan Harvey, and they have a child and they print their photos on grass. What you see here is grass. So of course it's not just any old grass, it's a grass that was developed by an agronomical laboratory, but what you see is a photosynthesis of grass. So they project a standard negative on a grassy surface and they obtain this type of photo that lasts, because of course it disappears gradually, but it lasted 2, 3, 4 years, so it does last for quite a long time before the picture fades away entirely. And this is the type of picture which, once again, is not sustainable or durable, and that is done against all of the rules of photography. So I talk to you of photographers who play with light or against light, who play with time, who play with chemistry, who play with printing. And that's it for today. I will leave you with this thing, this red lady who appears and disappears, and you will see her again Saturday with me, just to say, this is not a film, this is not cinema. Thank you.
Marc Lenot.
Marc Lenot, thank you. Thank you, Marc. Just one word to conclude. This work is the result of research that I led over a number of years. I've therefore written a book which is available here and there. And in particular, if you're interested, there is a signing on Saturday at 3 p.m. in Cosmos. Thank you very much. Photosynthèse Publishing House, playing against the camera. Thank you, Marc. He'll be back Saturday for the third episode of Playing Against Cameras. If you want to know how far he can push the borders of photography.